Good afternoon. My name is Jessica Broger, and on behalf of the Child Safety and Permanency Division at the Minnesota Department of Human Services, welcome this afternoon to the webinar on family and permanency teams. Today's webinar is one of a series of webinars that we have had throughout August and now a few still in September about changes that are due to the implementation of the Family First Prevention Services Act, which you will hear us refer to as FFPSA for short. Registration for the future webinars and the recordings of the previous webinars are available on the Minnesota Child Welfare Training Academy website. There's a button that says more, and then there will be FFPSA information there. Today, as we go through the information, we're really going to be focusing on the family and permanency team. We're going to cover small pieces of what's been covered in other webinars, but not go into detail on those as those other webinars are available. So a few housekeeping things. As per usual, you won't be able to unmute yourself. So with that, we would ask that any questions that you have that you put into the Q&A function. When we use that, we're able to immediately see the question, associate an answer if it's a short written one, or mark it as that we're going to talk live about it during the question and answer portion. If you put it in the regular chat, we will try to get to those. We may not see them all, and sometimes the question and answer and what matches with what gets lost in that function. So again, please try to use the Q&A function. Eric has posted the slides in the Google Drive that is in the chat for you now. And then this presentation is being recorded and will be available within the next few days. So today's presenters, again, my name is Jessica Broger, and I am a child foster care policy specialist. Joining me today are Paul Meinhardt, who is an adolescent services program representative, and Eric Pratt from the Child Welfare Training Academy. With that, I'll turn it over to Paul.
Thank you, Jessica. Sorry, it took me a little while to unmute there. Okay. So, as Jessica said, just a quick review of processes covered in more detail in other webinars. Qualified Residential Treatment Program, or QRTP, those are congregate care settings licensed and certified through the Minnesota Department of Human Services. Generally, a juvenile treatment screening team must conduct a screening and recommend placement in a QRTP. There are situations where a juvenile treatment screening team recommendation is not required. One is when a child, due to a mental health emergency or crisis, needs to be placed immediately in a QRTP. Juvenile treatment screening team processes are also not required when youth are being placed in residential programs licensed and certified to provide services to youth who have been or are at risk for sex trafficking or commercial sexual exploitation, or for youth who are pregnant and parenting, or for youth age 18 to 21 who are in supervised independent living settings. Otherwise, a juvenile treatment screening team process would be required. So today we're talking about family and permanency teams. When the juvenile treatment screening team recommends placement in a QRTP, the county agency or initiative tribal staff refer the matter to a qualified individual for a QRTP assessment of the child. They also assemble a family and permanency team, which includes the child's parents, legal guardians, or custodians, appropriate biological family members, other relatives, foster care providers, appropriate professionals who are resources for the child's family. That can be teachers, medical providers, mental health providers, clergy. For a child age 14 or older, a person selected by the child. And for an Indian child, the agency must make active efforts to include a tribal representative on the family and permanency team. Now, the QRTP assessment is to be completed prior to placement if the qualified individual recommends placing the child in a QRTP and the county agency or initiative tribal staff have placement authority over the child, then the county agency or initiative tribal staff make referrals to appropriate QRTPs. And upon acceptance by an appropriate program, places the child in that licensed and certified QRTP. When a child has been immediately placed in a QRTP because of a crisis, and there has not been an assessment, the qualified individual must complete the child's assessment within 30 days of the child's placement. As part of that QRTP assessment, the qualified individual receives information and a placement preference from the family and permanency team. When making a decision about a child's placement preference, the family and permanency team must recognize that the county agency or initiative tribal staff should place a child with the child's siblings, unless the court finds that placing a child with the child's siblings is not possible due to a child's specialized placement needs, or is otherwise contrary to the child's best interest. Also, the family and permanency team must recognize that the agency should place an Indian child according to the requirements of the Indian Child Welfare Act and the Minnesota Indian Family Preservation Act. If the qualified individual's recommendation is not the placement setting preferred by the family and permanency team, the qualified individual must include in the QRTP assessment the placement preference suggested by the family and permanency team and explain why the qualified individual did not recommend the placement preferred by the family and permanency team. And the out-of-home placement plan must include evidence that the family and permanency team was involved in the QRTP assessment to determine the appropriateness of the child's placement in a qualified residential treatment program. Whew. Most of that was review from earlier webinars. I snuck in a few new things just to pique your interest. Now let's talk more in detail about family and permanency teams. If I could have the next slide, please. No, I'm really excited about family and permanency teams being included in this process. The family and permanency team engages with the qualified individual to provide input into the QRTP assessment. The family and permanency team views the treatment being considered through the lens of the needs of the child and their family to support improved functioning. They have a perspective that the county agency or tribal initiative staff and the qualified individual conducting the QRTP assessment may not have. Now, children in residential treatment programs are particularly vulnerable to losing connection with their family and culture. The family and permanency team provides a process and structure to affirm and maintain a child's connection to their family and culture. It also brings the culture and community into the treatment process. After the QRTP assessment is completed, the family and permanency team continues to be involved in case planning and provides support for the permanency goals for the child after discharge from a QRTP placement. The county agency or initiative tribal staff invite the family and permanency team to participate in case planning and give the team notice of court reviews until the child is reunited with their parents or the child's foster care placement ends and the child is in a permanent placement. Next slide, please. Successful treatment programs create an environment that supports change. When the environment that supports change only exists in the treatment facility, the child and the family have to build a similar environment after treatment to sustain the changes made during treatment. The family and permanency team is positioned to provide that bridge from the treatment environment to the child and family's culture and community. Connection to culture improves our health and well-being. Connection to culture increases our sense of safety. That's why culture matters. Next click. I want to highlight 3 words on the slide: health, well-being, and safety. These are the cornerstones of the work we do. Because connection to culture and community fortifies these 3 things, it also has the ability to sustain a child and family after child welfare involvement ends. Imagine a child welfare system where a child leaves the system more connected to and reliant upon their culture, their family relationships, and their community. That's the transformative opportunity we have with family and permanency teams. Next slide, please. Now, county agency or initiative tribal staff provide notice to and contact potential family and permanency team members. If a child was in foster care prior to the QRTP, county agency or initiative tribal staff include relatives who responded to the relative search notice on the family and permanency team, unless the court finds that contacting a specific relative would present a safety or health risk to the parent, guardian, child, sibling, or any other family member. When a QRTP is the child's initial placement setting, county agency or initiative tribal staff must engage with the child and the child's parents to determine the appropriate family and permanency team members. When a child is placed with under a voluntary placement agreement under Chapter 260B, if the child's parents or legal guardians raise concerns about specific relatives or professionals, the team should not include those individuals unless the individual is a treating professional or has an important connection to the youth as outlined in their case plan. The department is working on a future family search screen in SSIS that will assist county agency and initiative tribal staff in reaching out and pulling together a family and permanency team. Once the county agency or initiative tribal staff have assembled the family and permanency team, they provide the names and contact information of team members to the qualified individual. They also provide the name and contact information of the qualified individual to members of the family and permanency team. County agency or initiative tribal staff do a handoff to the qualified individual to connect with the family and permanency team for the purposes of the QRTP assessment. After the QRTP assessment, the qualified individual does a handoff back to the county agency or initiative tribal staff to work with the family and permanency team for ongoing case planning guidance. I will now demonstrate the handoff. Jessica, I am done with my portion of the presentation. Would you like to take over?
Boy, thank you, Paul. I'm going to take over here and talk a little bit more about the role of the qualified individual. It's just going to be a brief explanation now to understand the process that the family and permanency team is embedded in. For more detail, again, we had the webinar on this on August 17th, and it is posted on the Minnesota Child Welfare Training Academy website with both the policy webinar as well as the supporting documents. So as a review, the purpose of the new QRTP assessment is to have an objective and independent review of the child's needs and strengths including the family and community resources, in order to determine if placement in a QRTP is the most effective and appropriate level of care to meet the child's needs in the least restrictive environment possible. So that's a big mouthful, but those are kind of the overarching pieces of the role in general. As part of that, assessing the child's needs and strengths, in statute, I think, talks about using an age-appropriate, evidence-based, validated functional assessment tool. And the department has chosen the Minnesota has chosen the Child Adolescent Strengths and Needs Assessment, called CANS for short, for this purpose. So the QI is really determining if the child's needs can be met with the child's family or in a family foster home with community services, rather than being placed into a QRTP. Part of the QI's assessment is done in conjunction with the family and permanency team, which, as Paul already mentioned, is assembled first by the responsible social service agency. The QI will be responsible for developing child-specific short and long-term mental and behavioral health goals using the information that they gathered from interviewing the child, the parents and guardians, and the members of the family and permanency team. Next slide is about engaging the actual engagement of the family and permanency team. So that's going to vary based family to family and from QI to QI. Part of the role of the agency would be supporting the QI in their practice as they're engaging the family and permanency team. So the consultation with the family and permanency team members will help the QI to better understand the child and their family. And one of the things that we're really looking at is the responsibility for equitable engagement of all family and permanency team members in the consultation process. So that would include both sides of the family, making sure that the engagement is respectful of an individual family culture and culturally responsive, considering how different methods of engagement might work better with different team members, even within the same family and permanency team. So before deciding how to consult with the family and permanency team, the qualified individual should engage with the family members, particularly the parent and child and anyone else that's kind of immediately available, on how best to engage the team as a whole. In-person meetings are one method that might be used, but there are other options, which I think we've all become much more familiar with, figuring out and making other options work in the last year and a half. Certainly that would include participation by phone, online, having some form of hybrid participation based on the child and family's needs and preferences. So one of the things that we hear is kind of what is the difference between a family and permanency team and the juvenile treatment screening team that would have already happened, and also a model that many agencies are already familiar with, which is family group conferencing. So the juvenile treatment screening team is professionally driven, and some family members may be invited to participate for the specific purpose of determining if residential placement will be recommended by the agency. A family group conference is a family-centered meeting, and it's not an agency-centered meeting where case managers and other service providers are really there to offer information to the family support system and allow them to make decisions and plan for themselves. So a family and permanency team is a consultation process with people who know the child and family best to take into careful consideration when they're making recommendations about a possible QRTP placement. As part of that, it's going to be really important that the family and permanency team members understand their role and what it is and isn't. And as Paul mentioned earlier, part of that is understanding the placement preferences for the child, specifically around placing a child with their siblings, unless a court finds that placing a child with their siblings is not possible due to their specialized placement needs or otherwise contrary to a child's best interests, and placement in accordance with the requirements of the Indian Child Welfare Act and the Minnesota Indian Family Preservation Act. And so those are going to be new things to many members of the family and permanency team as part of their considerations, and having that shared understanding of what their role will be and won't, and other parameters that need to be considered. So moving on to the ongoing involvement of family and permanency team members. After a QRTP assessment is completed, the county agency or the initiative tribe staff continue engagement with the family and permanency team. So there's been a handoff initially kind of from the agency staff to the qualified individual. And then that handoff kind of goes back to the agency staff for some ongoing case planning. I like to anchor that first in 260C.221, the relative search statute, which most often people focus largely on the part that's about finding a placement, but it's much more comprehensive and includes engaging family members to consider how they can support the child and family while the child is in placement, which includes, as listed on the slide, case planning for a parent and child, identifying strengths and needs of the parent and child, supervising visits, providing kind of informal respite and vacation visits, possibly providing transportation, certainly suggesting other relatives who might be a part of that support process. And a huge piece is helping maintain a child's familiar and regular activities in contact with friends and relatives. Now, embedded within that, there is some new statutory language about the role of the family and permanency team. And it really highlights that depending on the permanency goal. So when reunification is the permanency goal, the focus of the family and permanency team is first and foremost, preserving family relationships, identifying supports for the child and parents, and developing existing and additional supports for the child and the parents in order to achieve the permanency goal of reunification. The family and permanency team can help support that relationship by recognizing the parent's legal authority, consulting with the parent for ongoing planning for the child, assisting the parent with visiting and contacting their child, assisting and supporting the youth to engage in that QRTP assessment and case planning, and considers the parent the services and supports needed in order, again, to focus on that reunification as the permanency goal. Now, when transfer of permanent legal and physical custody, which we often say TPLPC, to a relative, or adoption is the permanency goal, the family and permanency team will coordinate with that proposed guardian or proposed adoptive parent, if there is one identified, to provide the child with educational services, medical care, and dental care, and coordinate with them in the services provided by that QRTP facility in order to support the permanency plan, coordinating during discharge planning, and the QRTP facility staff, as well as the proposed guardian or adoptive parent, in order to help meet that child's treatment needs after they are placed with that permanent placement with the proposed guardian, and helps to plan to meet the child's need for safety, stability, and connection. We keep emphasizing that connection piece, both with family and community, after the child is placed in permanent placement with the proposed guardian. And in the case of an Indian child, communicates with the child's tribe to identify necessary and appropriate services for the child, participate as part of that transition planning when the child's treatment ends, and again, how to maintain connection to the child's community, family, and tribe. So with that, I will pass it over to Eric to start talking about what does this look like for the new documentation elements in SSIS.
Well, thanks, Jessica, and thank you, Paul, for leading us into this presentation. This part of the presentation is going to go over, like Jessica said, where to find the QRTP family and permanency team in SSIS. So as with many of the changes and enhancements related to the Family First Prevention Services, we're going to find new folders located under the permanency folder of a participant. And it's also going to be under the QRTP documentation folder, which you can see up in the top left screenshot under QRTP family and permanency team. To create a new family and permanency team screen, you can right click from that particular folder, or make sure you are clicking on the family and permanency team folder and create an action menu as you can from the lightning bolt or the action menu at the bottom of the screen. Over to the right-hand side of the screen, you see the top portion of the QRTP family and permanency team screen. And we lead in, again, as many of the new screens do, with help text to provide users with context about how to fill out this particular new screen. If a placement has been entered under the Placements, Locations, and Absence folder and qualifies under the applicable certification of QRTP, that placement will appear in that top field next to the label QRTP placement. The associated work group that you're working from will autofill within the next field. Otherwise, there's a drop down if the child is a member of multiple work groups in SSIS to select the appropriate work group to draw into that field. The next field you see is an ICWA folder. This will indicate to users that the ICWA eligibility determination should be set up prior to being able to bring it into this screen. Users will bring that the latest ICWA eligibility determination or the most recent ICWA eligibility determination into this field. And next to the field is an index card. Once that ICWA eligibility determination information is brought into the field, the index card will contain specifics related to that particular ICWA eligibility determination. The next three fields, the user is asked to provide detail. For the first field, it's to describe the agency's reasonable and good faith efforts to assemble the family and permanency team, and if the child is an Indian child under section 260.751, the agency's active efforts to include the child's tribal representative on the family and permanency team. Users can enter up to 4,000 characters of free text describing the agency's efforts. The next field is if a parent or child age 14 or older raised concerns about specific relatives or individuals being on the family and permanency team, you're going to identify the person who raised the concern, provide a summary of the concern, including the individual who is the subject of the concern and the agency action taken in response to the concern. Again, you have up to 4,000 characters of free text to describe those concerns. If this field is left blank, the user will get data cleanup. Enter NA in this field if applicable. And then the final question is to describe the agency efforts to ensure that the family and permanency team meetings are held at a time and place convenient for the family. Again, up to 4,000 characters of text describing these efforts is allowable in that field. So then we can go to the next slide. The next section of this particular screen, and we'll go into more detail about this in the SSIS Coffee Talk at 3:30, but there is another section to the screen that's separated by splitter bars where users will enter relatives as well as participants of the family and permanency team. Guidance from FFPSA requires that when a child is placed in a QRTP placement, all contact information for members of the child's family and permanency team and for other relatives who are not part of the family and permanency team be included in this participant grid, as well as the out-of-home placement plan. So individuals will select from the drop-down next to team participant once they add new team participant, as indicated by the screenshot at the top of this slide. Again, you would create an action menu, select the team participants folder, and then add a new team participant. Individuals will have to be entered in SSIS, or relationships will need to be added in order to appear in the drop-down for team participant. Then the user will select the role and indicate whether this relative or individual listed in the grid is a team member or not by selecting from the yes or no radio buttons. And then contact information can be brought in for each one of the participants as well. However, as you can see at the bottom of the screenshot, contact information confidential. If a participant or a relative that is included in this grid wishes to have their contact information remain confidential, users will not bring it into the phone, email, and address fields, and they will select yes for that information to remain confidential. And next slide. So as you remember from the QRTP assessment webinar, or you may or may not remember, a list of team participants should be sent to the qualified individual who's providing that independent assessment for QRTP placement. And one of the ways you can send a list of participants is navigating to the grid related to team participants and printing the grid. And that's just a screenshot on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen of the print grid function. And then you can save that information to your designated file and then print that off and send it out with the QI assessment referral. QRTP assessment referral, sorry. And the information related to QRTP family and permanency teams can also be logged in chronology, new activity. So users will create a new activity, as I indicated, under chronology. And then you can see the various programs and services in the grid on this screen that you can choose the activity of, or the new activity from the dropdown of QRTP family and permanency team. And you'll want to get in good practice of doing this because eventually in future releases, these activities can be linked to the family and permanency team screen. Let me emphasize that again, it does not occur that way now. But in the future, you'll be able to link these activities to that actual family and permanency team screen under the permanency folder. One of the things I'm kicking myself right now because there is a portion of the redesigned out-of-home placement plan that also deals with family and permanency team and requires a lot of the same information that you see on this particular new screen under the permanency folder. From my understanding, based on testing and based on information that I've gotten from various documentations and sources here at DHS, the information from the new family and permanency screen will not interface with the out-of-home placement plan, even though a lot of similar information needs to be brought into that. So what I'm going to do, because I didn't add a slide of the out-of-home placement plan, is I'm going to include the draft document that we put together for the out-of-home placement plan webinar. And if you look at page 38, I just put the link in the chat. You'll see the QRTP family and permanency team requirements listed on the out-of-home placement plan document itself when an individual is placed in a QRTP. And I believe that's it for me. I'm going to turn it back over to our policy professionals to perform the Q&A.
All right, thank you, Eric. If you have any more questions, you can please continue to put them into the Q&A or into the chat, and I'll try to get all those out of there. Currently, we have a few questions here. I'm going to start with the first one. If you are supposed to assemble a family and permanency team prior to placement at a QRTP, there won't be a QRTP placement available to select in SSIS. What are the drop-down options next to QRTP placement?
Let me check that out.
All right, thank you. And I'm going to move on to a question that was answered while you're doing that, just to give people some context of a question and an answer. Question came in, should the family and permanency team members be entered as clients or collaterals? And the answer to that question is that functionality will be available in the December release in SSIS.
So this is Jessica. I'm going to jump in there a little with that. One of the things we wanted to build in was better functionality to enter in kinship search and pull known information, perhaps from other cases or people that are involved with the family. My understanding, again, that won't be released until December, but that the plan was that it would be available to pull in either known clients to SSIS in the statewide search, that if they're a family member, that you'd be able to pull them in, which would ideally include their contact information stuff, so you're not having to retype that. And it might be a collateral that is involved with other families you've worked with that has been entered into SSIS. And there will be the functionality to add it in as either a case-specific collateral or for the as a family member as part of through like the relationships too. So that's why it's not the clearest answer right now. And we're still, all the plans are there and it's being built out. It just won't be released in this September one. So it's going to be a little bit more for these initial few that would be coming through where it would be done in a hand type way. Whereas we would have that opportunity to pull as much as we can to make them to decrease as the amount of data entry work for people. So I hope that makes it a little bit more clear. Eric, would you have anything to add to that?
Nope, but I do have a response to the first question if you're ready to move on.
Go ahead, Eric.
So the QRTP placement field on the screen will only populate with placements that are entered in SSIS that qualify for that applicable certification of QRTP. So if a placement hasn't been entered into the placements, locations, and absences screen that with that applicable certification of QRTP, you won't be able to pull any information into that field. So if you're assembling a family and permanency team prior to the placement, once the placement has been entered into SSIS, users will want to return to the screen, and more than likely that field will be populated with that placement, but if not, it should appear in the dropdown. So it has to have that applicable certification of QRTP. And we've shown grids in the past about what qualify for that applicable certification of QRTP.
All right, thank you, Eric. Next question. What if the county does not have care and control and custody, but the tribe does?
If the county does not have placement authority, then the county would not be the one going through this QRTP process. And you have to, one way to think about it is in terms of part of, one of the things that's tied to this QRTP process is Title IV-E reimbursement. And so who's claiming Title IV-E reimbursement? If it's the county agency, then they must have, well, I shouldn't say it that way, but they want to make sure that this process is followed so that that placement and that child remains IV-E eligible. So that's one of the considerations. But really we're looking at whoever has placement authority would be responsible for doing this. Deb, did you want to add?
Let me add to that a little bit. So if the tribe has placement authority, but the county is financially responsible, then it's my understanding that what occurs is the juvenile treatment screening team occurs in a county. And the tribe and the county work together to organize that. And it is an important time for the county and the tribe to coordinate together this process, because if you are referring on to a QRTP, that those Title IV-E required processes occur, and that the county and tribe work together to organize the just like the county and tribe work together on the other pieces to organize the family and permanency team and to get a referral to the qualified individual. But yeah, if the tribe has placement responsibility and is an initiative tribe and has financial responsibility, the county will not be involved in this process with the tribal placement. But if there is a circumstance where the tribe has placement responsibility and there is a financially responsible county, then as with other circumstances regarding placement, the county and the tribe work together.
Okay, thank you, Deb. Next question. Will the QI or qualified individual be required to have contact with all permanency team members?
I can answer that. Take the first swing at that anyway. So really, here's what I want to say about that. I'm going to talk around it before I answer it. The county agency or the initiative tribal staff are responsible for assembling the team. So they determine who is on the family and permanency team. If the qualified individual is having trouble getting in contact with a member, that should go back to the county agency or tribal initiative staff to say, you know, I'm having a hard time connecting here. What can you do to help me connect with that person? So really the answer is you should attempt to contact all permanency team members. If that becomes that would be the qualified individual should. And if the qualified individual is not able to, they should be in contact with the county agency and the tribal initiative staff to talk that through and what's happening with that. And if there are family and permanency team members who are not available, then I think that needs to be included in the QRT assessment. All of that is qualified individual stuff that would be covered in the training for qualified individuals. But part of the agency staff and initiative tribal staff being supportive of this process and supportive of the qualified individual is being there to help work through those types of issues.
Excellent answer, Paul. I would just add one more piece to that, and that is if the qualified individual was not able to connect with one of the family and permanency team members, that should be noted because the agency is reporting on how the family and permanency team members were engaged. So if one was listed and the qualified individual couldn't connect with them because they were out of town or something, then the qualified individual should provide that information to the agency so they can report it to the court if necessary.
All right, thank you. I'll move on to the next question. I'm not understanding how to enter the family and permanency team members. Are they entered as participants in the work group, as clients or collaterals, or is there going to be a way to add them only to the FPT team screen? Jessica, is this what you had answered earlier as well?
I saw that question come in and tried to wrap it into the other question as well.
Okay, thank you.
You know, in
next-
future, oh, sorry. This is Eric. I just wanted to add that, yes, right now, they should be added, you know, they should be either participants in the work group or collaterals or professional collaterals. And in future releases, we'll have a relative search function to make it easier to bring relatives into the family and permanency team that may or may not be part of the team.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Next question is, are releases of information signed by the parent guardian required prior to approval, or sorry, prior to the referral to the QI?
I will answer answer this. This is Deb. And the question is, when is the release of information completed? And I think that has to do with how you're assembling the team. I think a great time to do that would be during the juvenile treatment screening team, when you're bringing the parents together and you're having a discussion, if the recommendation is a QRTP placement, that start talking about who should be members of the family and permanency team, and perhaps have that conversation there about getting those releases signed so that they can participate in the assessment. With the qualified individual, there will also need to be a release for the qualified individual signed, and to get that also done during that period of time, or make arrangements to have it done during that period of time. So yeah, I think the juvenile treatment screening team is a great time to talk about the necessary releases based on the recommendation of the team.
Okay, thank you, Deb. I think the last question at this point is, what if QRTP placement isn't approved? How does that get documented?
So this is Deb. I'll jump in. There is a screen that is the juvenile treatment screening team, and the outcome of that. And there is a place in SSIS to document it. That was talked about in the juvenile treatment screening team webinar, and that is available to watch or to look at the PowerPoint, depending on how you like to do it, or both, on the Academy website.
This is Eric. There's also a place on the QRTP assessment tab on that we went over in a previous webinar to document if a QI does not recommend placement in a QRTP. So that is another place to document if it's approved for screening by the juvenile treatment screening team and moved to the QRTP assessment phase. There's a place to document on that screen if the QRTP is not recommended.
All right, thank you, Eric. Another question came in. What happens when the parent does not attend the juvenile permanency team meeting?
So first of all, there's going to be times when a parent will not be part of that, and that is when you have a termination of parental rights and there wouldn't be a parent attending. If it is a CHIPS circumstance where you've got a CHIPS petition on the child for the child, and the parent cannot attend, I would suggest having a conversation with your county attorney regarding that. If it's a circumstance where there's a voluntary, I would suggest that discussions with the parent about how they could attend that meeting, because they would have to be an active part of this decision-making body.
All right, thank you, Deb. Another question. Should all relatives be entered as collaterals on a case regardless of participation on the family and permanency team? And should each relative be cleared in the clearing log?
That's a really good question. Because the guidance states that relatives that are involved with the team or not should be listed on the chart. If you enter somebody as a collateral, you don't have to clear them, but I want to look into that more and provide, unless somebody else on the panel here can provide some more guidance about that. I want to look into that a little further.
I can jump into that. Not necessarily entered as a collateral on the case, but it does need to be, we're going to have that functionality when that new screen comes out in December. But it does need, if there's a known relative, for example, the child was already in placement, therefore the previous relative search piece needs to apply. And you need to pull it in and note whether or not in the screen it'll give you the option, are they a part of the family and permanency team, yes or no? And then that is part of the out-of-home placement plan requirements from the FFPSA that needs to be turned into the court as well. So there will need to be documentation on who was part of the team and who was not. And that will be part of the out-of-home placement plan. Deb, do you have anything more to add to that?
No, I think that's great direction for what we know at this point in time. So as these screens are further developed, and then we may need to provide additional information, but I think that's good for now.
All right, thank you. Another question, if the out-of-home placement approved is not QRTP qualified, does this process remain the same? For example, family or treatment, foster care, corporate foster homes, etc.
So
Sorry, Paul, do you want to jump in?
sure. So this process of having a QRTP assessment by a qualified individual, of assembling a family and permanency team, is a process when the juvenile treatment screening team has recommended QRTP placement. If the juvenile treatment screening team has looked at this and has determined that the child's needs can be met in a foster family home, in their own home with their parents, then we're not in a QRTP process, and the qualified individual doing an assessment and pulling together a family and permanency team they don't happen. So what we're talking about today only follows when the juvenile treatment screening team has recommended QRTP placement in a QRTP.
I will just add to what Paul said and just be very clear that when you're determining the level of care that a child needs, and you should be looking at the QRTP, a family foster home does not provide the same level of care as a QRTP. So when the agency is approving that placement level, they should be looking at that as being the placement level they're approving, as Paul said. And that if you're looking at a family foster home and the agency decides a family foster home can meet this child's needs, a QRTP process is not necessary. If you're looking at what we've called a corporate foster home, that is no longer a family foster home. So remember that a corporate foster home is no longer a family foster home because it shifts staff, and the license holder does not live in the home. So therefore, when you're looking at that, be aware if the one you're looking at or the one that's being developed will be a QRTP or not, because it is possible that they could be.
All right, thank you, Deb. Another question, are judges and county attorneys receiving Family First training?
Yes, they are through the Children's Justice Initiative, the Minnesota Judicial Branch, CJI branch. And we are collaborating with them on that training. So, for example, both Child Safety and Permanency Division staff and CJI staff from the Minnesota Judicial Branch will be co-presenting at the Minnesota County Attorneys Association Conference. There are CJI meetings where this information is being presented. And we have worked with the Minnesota Judicial Branch and coordinated training and reviewed their training that they are providing specifically to judges. And that process actually has already started. The training process.
Excellent. Thank you, Paul. Last question is, if a selected facility has not yet been certified as a QRTP at the time of placement, but later becomes certified, do you have to go back and do all of this?
So if the facility is not certified on the day of placement, then that facility is not a QRTP. And you do not need to go back and do anything regarding children that are already placed in a facility if they become a QRTP later.
All right. Thank you, Deb. And I'm going to turn it over to Jessica for closing.
Well, we just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today to talk about the family and permanency team, learn a little bit more. I do want to note that in the chat, Eric has included a link to the FFPSA specific trainings, the webinars and the job aids and other materials that we've developed and that you can access. This should be up within a few days. And as always, if you have any other questions now or as they come up during implementation, our email is dhs.csp.fostercare@state.mn.us. And we have staff that check that regularly throughout the day to try to get back as soon as possible. Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.